Hi, my name is Brad Miller, and this is the Chronically Human podcast, where we believe that the individual is sacred and sovereign. And today we have as a guest Jason Pye, who is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs at Freedomworks. He describes himself as politically homeless and libertarian-minded. And we want him on here today to talk about his involvement with the First Step Act, how he got into the ideas of individual liberty, and where he sees freedom going in the future. So, Jason, thank you for being on today.
Hey, Brad, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And
so,
yeah, go ahead.
First Step Act is a fun subject, and it's a long history that I mentioned to you before we came on. I could talk for hours about and criminal justice reform more broadly, but this was something that so. I think a lot of us thought that when Donald Trump was elected president in November of 2016, that criminal justice reform was like pretty much DOA on the Hill. And that Congress, there'd be members of Congress who introduced legislation on criminal justice reform, but it wouldn't go anywhere because the White House wouldn't support it. And one thing I told both people, like advocates on the outside, as well as some congressional staff who would say these things, and I just said, and these are people who are supportive, and they would say, it's dead, we shouldn't bother with it. And I would say, no, look, I don't mean to talk, but this is not necessarily, it can be a negative thing, but it's not necessarily in and of itself a negative thing. I said, look, the president is transactional. If he can see a political benefit of doing something and it gives him a bipartisan win, especially a good bipartisan win that the conservative base will even support, then he'll do it. It's just a matter of, it may take some convincing, but he'll do it. Mm-hmm. And here I am in January of 2019, less than a month after the passage of the First Step Act in Congress, and I was right. So I can say that, and I was right about it. But the way this all started, Congressman Doug Collins, who represents Georgia's 9th congressional district. I've known Doug since he was a state house member in Georgia, in the Georgia legislature. His staff approached me, his chief of staff approached me about keeping the topic alive of criminal justice. Now, Doug is not someone, we consider him an ally on certain issues, but he's not, broadly speaking, he's not like Justin Amash or Thomas Massey or Mike Lee or Rand Paul. Mm-hmm. Those guys are allies on almost everything. Doug Collins is a little bit more here and there. But so they approached me, and we sat down with them and gave them a list of 14 or 15 different ideas that they could pursue legislatively on criminal justice reform. And it was across the board. It was sentencing reform, it was corrections reform or prison reform, it was mens rea or criminal intent requirements. If you commit a crime, there has to be some criminal intent language inserted that you actually knew you were committing a crime. Mm-hmm. That maybe because there are about 400,000 regulations that carry criminal penalties, and the average American commits 3 felonies a day and they don't even know that.
I probably do more than that, but that's okay. We won't get into that.
Yeah, but we can discuss. That's a fun issue to talk about. I'd love to talk about that stuff. But so that civil asset forfeiture reform, juvenile justice reform, record sealing, expungement, a list of things that we thought were worthy ideas, whether they wanted to go a route of picking a couple of these things or all of these things, or they want to do a full scale omnibus bill. So they came to me a month later and said that, look, we're going to just pursue prison reform. We think it's the lowest hanging fruit. We think we can get the president on board with it. I understand if you don't want to support it because it's just prison reform, but it's something. And I said, look, I want sentencing reform, but we'll go with this and we'll see what happens. Mm-hmm. It was months and months and months. We had the bill introduced in July, I think, of 2017. It went months and months and months of no anything on the bill. Some talking, possibility of moving on. The White House started talking about it. Sort of one-offs, they were gonna, positively looking at it, smiling upon it. And then suddenly, in January of last year, the president mentions prison reform in a State of the Union address. And we're sitting there going, holy crap, he actually, all right, like interesting, and we got a markup in the House Judiciary Committee in April of last year. Got it pushed out of the committee, passed the House on May 22nd of last year. And that night was particularly my staffer Sarah Anderson and I. We did more than 30 touches on the Hill that day on that bill.
What does that mean, Jason? 30 touches for the layman out there like myself.
Sir, I'm a lobbyist for a living. That is what I do. I am, and I know most maybe people who listen to your podcast may see the term lobbyist and have a negative connotation. There are good lobbyists,
sure.
And I like to think of myself as a good. I like to think of myself as a good lobbyist. I fight for limited government and economic freedom and personal liberty. Those are the things I want to protect your civil liberties and cut your taxes. That's the stuff I work on. So we had a list of offices who we didn't know were the member. In this case we were on the House side, the representative. We didn't know where they were, so we went by their offices. We asked to talk to the relevant staffer, and we lobbied them to support the First Step Act. And that day, we got every single one of the members we lobbied, with the exception of one. The only two Republicans voted against. We were lobbying the Republican side, not the Democratic side. I mean, we're a grassroots conservative organization, a libertarian conservative organization. So Democrats typically aren't going to listen to us that much. Some do, but not many. So we were hitting exclusively Republican offices. We only lost one. Only two Republicans ended up voting against the one of whom I kind of expected to vote against it. That was Steve King from Iowa, and the other one was Bill Huizenga from Michigan.
What was their problem with the bill? Why did they feel like they couldn't support it?
Steve King is just there's no nice word to describe him, so I'm just going to leave that one alone.
Okay.
Bill Huizenga. Steve King was actually, and we can come back around to Steve King. He was actually a real problem when that bill came back from the Senate back last month. Bill Huizenga had a particular problem with one provision of the bill. He agreed with the rest of it. It was the way it was described to me is he supported 99% of the bill. There was just one part of the bill he didn't like, and that dealt with the expansion of federal prison industries, or UNICOR, FPI. Basically, we use federal prison industries to allow prisoners to get skills that they can use in a manufacturing job when they leave the prison walls. And they get paid, but they don't get paid very much. It's like $1 an hour, basically. And he felt that it could unfairly compete with businesses in his district.
Oh, wow. So he wasn't even going from the liberty, slavery, almost type aspect of that, the $1 an hour. He was going for, it was unfair competition. Yeah,
that's basically what he was saying.
Okay.
And but he voted, so he voted against it. And it was a provision of the bill that we thought was so uncontroversial that we hadn't really versed ourselves in it that much. We were mostly focused on the recidivism reduction part of the bill, because the goal of the bill, of the First Step Act, is, at least the original version exclusively, was to incorporate incorporate programs in prisons that would reduce an offender's likelihood of becoming a repeat offender or recidivating.
Sure, that's good for everybody.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just basic public safety promotion. You want to enhance public safety. That's what you do. You reduce their risk of becoming a repeat offender. That's exactly what you want to do. And it's why more than 30 states have done it. Georgia, my home state, has done a lot of criminal justice, a bunch of reform of the criminal justice system under Governor Deal, including some of the core elements of the First Step Act. In fact, Georgia's probably gone further than any state, including Texas. Texas was the first state to really do criminal justice reform. And it's worked. The violent crime rate in Georgia is lower now than it was in 2011 when Governor Deal started these reforms.
Oh, that's great.
So, it's great. And so there were other provisions of the bill. This was part of the prison reform side, and it's a recidivism reduction tool, but we voted against it. But we were mostly focused on the prison reform elements, the recidivism reduction programming. There were other parts of the bill that fixed existing law. There's this part of existing law called good time credits that if you are serving more than a year in prison and not life, you can earn up to 54 days of good time and be not released early, but put into some sort of like early release program,
like a halfway house or something like that.
Yeah, like a halfway house, probate, like into like the custody of U.S. Trial and Probation Services. They would monitor you, for example, for like 3 to 5 years after your release. That's the kind of like, and that's another part of that bill. Like that was the 54 days of good time. That's what the law says in statute. But the Bureau of Prisons, which oversees federal prisoners, had, with their shady math, had interpreted it to be 47 days of good time. So we fixed that in law to make it, to ensure that the 54 days, the full 54 days, was available. It was a real meaningful change, and it got a lot of Democrats on board with the original bill too. So we get the bill out of the House on May 22nd, and it goes to the Senate, and it sits. It sits for almost 7 months with little movement. Chairman Chuck Grassley, who was then the Senate Judiciary Committee chairman, had become a new convert to criminal justice reform, and had become so invested in the issue that he wanted to add sentencing elements to it, like some sentencing reforms to it. And these were good. What we ended up getting were 4 sentencing reforms that address some problems with the criminal justice system, like the federal 3 strikes law. There's another element called 924C. It's 18 U.S. Code 924C, where you can get. Are you familiar with the case of Weldon Angelos by any chance?
No, I'm not.
So Weldon Angelos is a guy who was convicted of selling 3 dime-bag quantities of marijuana to a confidential informant back in like 2002 or 2003, and the informant claimed that he had a firearm on his person and in his car, and then when law enforcement raided his home, they found additional guns.
So they wanted to stack that gun charge on him.
That's exactly it. So he got charges for the base offense of selling marijuana, or actually what they accused him of was trafficking. But we're talking dime-bag quantities, which is hardly trafficking, but be that as it may. So he got the base offense. Then he got a sentencing enhancement, which is an additional charge for carrying a firearm in the commission of a drug trafficking offense. So, and because although this penalty is meant to go against people who are repeat offenders, Weldon got hit with it because they under a single indictment and Weldon was a first-time nonviolent drug offender. He got hit with it 3 times.
Oh wow!
So he got 5 years for the first offense, because the first offense carries a 5-year penalty.
Is that mandatory? He got 5 years. The 5 years.
Yeah, mandatory. It's 5 years mandatory. So you got 5 years for the first offense, 25 years for the second one, and 25 years for the third one. Wow. And they're stacked. So this man got a 55 years mandatory minimum sentence for selling 3 dime-bag quantities of marijuana.
That's insane.
Now, it's absolutely crazy. And Weldon is now out of prison. He's a friend of mine on Facebook. Weldon is now out of prison. He was released. I think what happened, the records are sealed, but I think what happened was he was given the reason he was let out because the prosecutors came back in and dropped the charges. So, but that particular part has been fixed. So you can no longer hit someone on the first time offender with that kind of like stacking of the firearm charge. You have to give them one. They have to serve out that sentence, and then if they get caught again, then you can hit them with the 25-year one.
That's good.
Because that's how it's.
Yeah.
That's how
better.
It's supposed to work. So
yeah.
Right. So you got 3 strikes. You have 924C. You have the expansion of the existing safety valve for nonviolent drug offenders. We expanded that out. There is a safety valve, but it's a little restrictive. So we fixed that. We expanded it out a little bit. And then the final thing we got, which is, to me, a huge deal, is the retroactivity of the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010. The Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, for those of you who are not familiar, the crack cocaine mandatory minimum was 100 times worse than the mandatory minimum for powdered cocaine.
That's horrific.
So,
that's horrific.
yeah, it's no, but it was passed in the height of the crack epidemic in the 1980s.
Right.
So we, in 2010, they changed the law to 18 to 1 from 100 to 1, but it wasn't retroactive. It was only prospective. Because there was a directive to the Sentencing Commission did make some guideline changes. Basically, the guidelines are what judges use to do sentences. They'll recommend sentencing ranges. And so they made some changes because of the law, and they made those changes retroactive. So some people did get out early or were resentenced, but not all of them. So this covers people who were not eligible for resentencing under the 2010 change. So,
and we're talking about thousands of people here, aren't we? There's quite a few people involved.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the changes to the Fair Sentencing Act, making it retroactive, affects, according to the United States Sentencing Commission, could affect as many as 2,600 people, almost 2,700 actually. So, now these people have to. It's not automatic. They have to petition the court to get resentenced, and resentencing is not guaranteed if they petition the court. The court's going to take in other issues into the equation. Have they served have they had any behavioral issues? Were they prone to causing riots? Did they follow all the guidelines of the prison they were at? Do they have any violent felonies on their record? Those are things they're going to take into consideration. Are they a risk to their community if they come out? Those are all things that are going to be considered as a judge looks at this. But be that as it may, this is still a positive development. Under the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, the guideline changes that took place then, about 55% of the people who petitioned for resentencing under the guideline changes were granted resentencing and released early. So it's a huge deal, and really at the end of the day, a lot of the good time credit changes will affect probably less than 4,000 people. That's like a 7-year-old estimate. So it's substantially less than that. Maybe ballparking it probably closer to 2,500, but it's still a huge deal.
Right. And
so,
Jason, this is on the federal level, correct? And this kind of sets the tone for what the states are doing as well. Do they see it as an example?
Well, I think it validates what we've done at the state level. Because, like I mentioned before, 30 states have enacted some measure of criminal justice reform. And some didn't wait for the federal government to take the lead. They just did it themselves. And a lot of it was to address the cost of incarceration. It was a cost-saving measure more than anything else. Certainly why Texas did it. They've saved $3 billion as a result of their criminal justice reforms. Georgia's saved about $300 million, but Georgia's been relatively new at this. Texas has been doing it now for more than a decade. Georgia's been doing it for about 6-7 years. So we're seeing a validation of our work at the federal level by Congress taking action, especially this president taking action. So I think it helps bolster the case for more work later. But to finish the discussion here, we had to overcome a lot. So we got the sentencing changes added. We made some fixes to the prison reform side. We had some hurdles to overcome in the Senate with Senator Tom Cotton and Senator John Kennedy, who did everything they could to try to kill this bill. Frustratingly so. I'm not gonna mince words here. They were examples of them flat out lying about the bill and what the bill would do. But we were able to overcome those, and we had a 87-12 vote last month to pass the bill out of the Senate. Probably one of the happiest nights of my professional career, because I knew the Senate was going to be the problem. Then I started worrying about the House. We had a good House vote. We lost some Republicans. We lost more Republicans than we lost the last time. I think about 30 to 40 Republicans voted no.
But that's okay. We had more than 350 who voted yes, and that includes Democrats as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got the president signed the bill into law, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to that signing ceremony. Got to stand in the Oval Office and watch the president sign the bill, and that was nothing's going to top that, Mike. I should go ahead and just quit now, because nothing in my life, in my professional life, is going to top that.
That is a big deal. How was it at the Oval Office? Is it some people, I guess they've done renovations, but some people think it's not really up to snuff of what it should be there at the White House. What was your impression of being there?
So that's my second time being in the Oval Office. The first time I went was March of 17, and we were there for a meeting with the vice president on healthcare. And it was at the time of the debating Obamacare repeal, and my organization was not real thrilled with the Republican alternative. We wanted more free market alternatives. Mm-hmm. So about 45 minutes into this meeting, Pence, the vice president, stands up and says, "Have y'all ever had a tour of the West Wing?" And I went to the White House 3 times under Obama. And when I say I went to the White House, it means I went to the White House grounds. The meetings I had during the Obama era were with we met with Valerie Jarrett, who is like one of his chief advisors, and they were in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, or the EEOB, which is the big gray building next door to the White House. It's like on the West Wing side. So to that point, I had never been in the West Wing, and it was really cool to go in the West. I still haven't. The only rooms I've been in the West Wing, I guess this is somewhat cool to say, but I would like to see more of the West Wing. Like, I've been in the lobby, I've been in the Roosevelt Room, and I've been in the Oval Office. That's the only 3 rooms inside the West Wing I've been in.
That's better than 99.9%
no,
of people.
I know, but it was like I want to see the press briefing room. I want to see, and I was really disappointed. I'd say this is because I'm a big fan of the show The West Wing.
Okay.
The TV show from the 2000s. And when I went in the Roosevelt Room for the first time, I looked around. I was like, "This looks nothing like it does in Jed Bartlett's administration. This TV lied to me."
That's funny.
But the Oval Office was bigger than I expected.
Okay.
It was people say it's not up to snuff. Could have fooled me.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
It certainly looked very cool. And I think the second time, like the first time I wasn't there long enough, really. I mean, it hit me where I was at and what I was doing, but the second time was just more of like, holy crap! Like, what am I doing here? Like, never in my entire life, because like this is my second career. My first career, I worked in the life insurance business with your brother.
Right.
Like
it's a little different than what you're doing now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it's very different, and I did like political activism like on the side. Mm-hmm. But like this is it's been a fun ride for sure. But it was cool that I got a pen. It wasn't one of the ones he signed. It wasn't the one he signed it with. He gave that one to Van Jones, who was also in the room with us. But they gave out pins to all the people who were there. I gave mine to my staffer, Sarah, who worked on the bill with me, because I felt like she deserved some recognition for it, so I gave it to her. But it was a very cool experience, and I would love to have something like that happen again. But like, I got the one bill I've been working on for 4 years and cared very passionately about across the finish line.
That's awesome. And this is something, too, you talk about Van Jones, who isn't really known for individual liberty or free market ideas, but criminal justice, I think, is the place where everybody can meet and say, hey, man, we need to really take a look at the laws and how full the prisons are. The U.S. has the largest prison population in the world, and how it's grown exponentially since the 1970s when the drug war started.
No, look, that's and let me just say, like, someone like Van is, and I'm not going to sit here and say like Van's, he's someone I've gotten to know a little bit. He's someone, and he and I have talked some, and I respect him. I disagree. We disagree a lot. There's no getting around that. But Van is very thoughtful. And I think at this stage in his career, he's truly interested in finding areas where people can work together, even if they disagree on other things. Let's identify the areas we can work together and let's move forward in those areas where we can. So I appreciate that, because I'm not going to agree with Van on taxation. I'm not going to agree with Van on healthcare or spending.
Right.
But we both agree the government does things like infringe on our liberties through surveillance programs or incarcerates too many people, and that the war on drugs has been a $1 trillion failure.
Yeah, that trillion. That's what the T. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, it has been $1 trillion failure, and we want to. I mean, that's. And I think the First Step Act is like sort of like an acknowledgement. It's nobody's going to go out there and say that. Not many people, but to me, the First Step Act is an acknowledgement that we've got to do something differently. Now, for some people, that's legalization of marijuana or other substances. My organization doesn't take positions on those things.
Sure.
But we do have to start handling things differently, because at the end of the day, like addiction, whether it's alcohol addiction or drug addiction, be that both legal drugs like prescription drug like opioids and painkillers, or illegal drugs, addiction's a health issue.
Right.
And we need to start.
Law enforcement shouldn't be involved at all, in my
Well,
opinion.
I mean, there's certainly. I'm not going to go that far. I think I see where you're. I think, generally speaking, I agree with you.
Right.
But I think there is a case where law enforcement does have to be involved, because there are certainly people who drug traffickers, for example. Many drug traffickers, I would even argue most drug traffickers suffer from addiction problems themselves, but not all of them. So, we need to identify the people who truly need help, and the people who are truly problems, like career criminals, things like that.
Yeah, I can see that. My take here at Chronically Human is to legalize everything. I know that's not what your organization supports, definitely. So we tend to think on the individual liberty side, where it's a personal choice what you consume or not consume, and then your actions after that, whether you drank a cup of coffee or if you had a Red Bull, it doesn't matter what you ingest; it's what you do to other people's, person and property. That's where law enforcement gets involved.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, there are two theories or two lines of thought to which I subscribe, and that's John Stuart Mill's the harm principle. You should be able to do what you want to do as long as you don't hurt anyone in the process. And Thomas Jefferson also said, as long as it doesn't pick my pocket or break my leg.
Exactly.
And that's I mean, that's how I tend to view things personally. From what I've done not in my career as well as my personal activism, that tends to be how I look at things. Does it pick my pocket? Does it break my leg? Does it promote harm on other people? And harm, and by harm, I'm not talking about even actual physical harm. I'm talking about, does it initiate force?
Exactly.
That's where you get into the non-aggression principle and all that stuff. But and unfortunately, it's hard to be a pure adherent to the NAP when you are a lobbyist. So
I totally agree.
I tend to view myself as more of a practical libertarian who recognizes that the system exists and I have to work within it to effect any positive change.
I totally agree on that. I actually got involved recently with keeping kratom legal in Georgia, and I actually spoke at a committee meeting. They had public comments, and personally, I just want to be left alone, but that's not the world we live in. So I do appreciate your point of view of engaging the system and making it better where you can.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have to. I mean, and even the members of Congress who libertarians tend to look up to, like Justin Amash and Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, and Mike Lee. I mean, they vote for bills that aren't always ideal, and that's just the nature of the beast. And I have lobbied on things that aren't always ideal. I think at the end of the day, they're net positive, but they're not always ideal ways to get there. Like the tax bill wasn't perfect. Taxation is theft. I fully recognize that, but I wanted to lower your tax rates. And,
less theft is better than more theft, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But that's that's kind of just how I've approached my job, is to try to be pragmatic while also trying to promote the ideals of freedom. And yeah, I mean, like, I'm telling you right now, when you walk into the Ways and Means staff, when you're a meeting with their staff, and you actually say taxation is theft, they just kind of look at you like, I didn't know you were like one of those people.
That's like saying the Death Star is a bad idea, right? You know, like...
Yeah, no, I mean, it's people. I mean, I think that's someone with my background who, again, this is my second career, and I think I'm at a point in my life where I don't really care if I offend you in a meeting or say something that like you're taken aback by. Mm-hmm. Certainly I want to be productive, so I don't go crazy, but like I want to take you out of your comfort zone. I want you to come where I am. So I'm going to say things that are going to throw you off, and say things like taxation and stuff, because I honestly truly believe that. So I want to say things like taxation is theft and Tom Cotton's a fascist and all those things, like, are all things I've actually said in meetings. So that's it. So,
well, I can see that. I can definitely see how advancing the ideas about liberty, people just don't talk about in our normal everyday life. It's like everybody avoids the fact that we live in a system that increasingly destroys your personal choice to do anything. Yeah. And we've come so far from the natural rights tradition, the Bill of Rights, that people don't understand that the philosophy behind that says that you own yourself, and that your rights come from God or from nature and not the government.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's we have drifted a long way from sort of the Lockean views on which our nation was founded, on which, the Declaration of Independence is a treatise on the views of the natural rights of man. The Ninth and 10th Amendments, specifically the Ninth Amendment, is...
Nobody talks about the Ninth Amendment, but it's... Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the Ninth Amendment is I mean, it's basically a nod in the Bill of Rights to our natural rights and liberties.
So and everything not listed here you can do, basically, as long as you don't
we realize we mentioned things in 1 through 8 that are very specific and enumerated, but like we're not saying that you can't do other things too. Because they realize there were so many rights. Like we get into discussions about and this is one thing that frustrates me, and like I have these conversations with people, and I'm gonna pull out a soda out of my fridge here.
Okay.
We say things. We talk about. I don't want to dive into immigration discussion because we don't work on immigration either.
Okay.
But it's we talk about like the right to travel, the right to migrate.
Mm-hmm.
My belief as a libertarian, and philosophically libertarian, is I shouldn't have to have the government's permission to travel. That I should have the government's position to be to go where I can earn a living and better my family or myself. Just because I have those rights, just because I exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that borders shouldn't exist or anything like that. I'm absolutely not saying that, but we have to remember that the rights, the liberties, and the beliefs on which the United States was founded were how the framers, both the founding fathers, people who were at the Second Continental Congress, who signed the Declaration of Independence, they believe those rights apply to all men.
Now, do you think with the immigration, I know you don't deal with that at all, but it's kind of like a hot button topic right now. And I can see both sides of it, where a nation, you don't need a defense department if you don't have a border, right? The idea of a border is that from here in, there's a certain set of principles that people adhere to, but it's gotten before World War I, people didn't have to have a passport to travel through Europe or America because of the shared belief system. And I think that when you have shared principles, that ideal of being able to travel wherever you want, especially the ideas of private property and the idea of freedom of choice, freedom of speech, and those things are very important to.
Yeah.
They're almost like a principle of border, a border of principles, if you will.
Yeah.
And the less the principles fall down, I think the bigger the walls have to get. I don't know if that's some kind of inevitable type of deal, but it seems to be that we're going that way.
Well, it's the whole thing with the current debate where we're talking about a damn wall,
right.
Where it's just like I get it. I don't necessarily agree, but I get it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain, there are certainly areas of the border that probably do need a wall.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, shouldn't we want people who are peaceful to come here if they want to come here and earn a living? And then the argument out of the mouth of a restrictionist would be, well, they should come here legally. Well, we should fix the immigration system.
I totally agree about the legal immigration system. I have a friend from Ireland, and he played golf here at Clayton State, and he got into trouble because his counselor didn't file correct paperwork, and he can't come into the United States for years now. And he's one of the best guys I've ever met. And those guys get screwed over, and then you see waves of people coming in, and the reaction is to secure the border and, like you said, to fix the problem that the legal system has.
And to be clear, I want to make sure people understand when I'm talking as Jason Pye, the person right now, not as, because again, Freedomworks doesn't work on this issue, but I haven't lobbied on this issue at all.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot. You have to fix the underlying problem. Everything else is just a patch.
Exactly.
You have to fix the underlying problem. You have and I get some things I understand, some things I don't about this issue. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
People need to be honest when it comes down to it. That immigrants are generally speaking are a net positive
mm-hmm.
on our economy. At the same time, I understand that the complaints of people who have come here the right way, legally, the sort of problems they have or the issues they have with people who have come here legally and still benefit from the system.
Right, definitely. I'm sorry to get off track on that. Man.
No, it's fine. But that's really all I can say at this point. I've probably said too much. But
I think it's a super complicated issue, definitely.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think that criminal justice reform is one of those systemic issues that needs to be addressed. And I think the First Step Act is the first step, and hopefully we're going to see more and more of that happening.
You and me too.
Yeah, I think everybody can get involved in that, because when people go to prison, it destroys their ability to earn a living. It destroys their ability to vote. It destroys their family's ability to prosper. And then the parole system is hugely expensive that nobody gets into. But there's a huge amount of economic cost when somebody is thrown in jail, and they target, for whatever reason, we can go into that, because Nixon did start the war on drugs to control the anti-war people and also the African American population.
Yeah.
And,
no, look, we've seen.
You go ahead.
I was saying no. We've seen. I was actually talking about this last night with my Uber driver, who we got on the topic of. He asked me what I did for a living,
mm-hmm.
and I said, I'm a lobbyist. And he asked me what I work on. I said, well, I worked on First Step Act, and he's like, oh, I follow that a lot because I work with the inner city youth to make sure we get them scholarships to go to Gonzaga and Georgetown Prep. And these are minority youth who don't have who don't have a parent at home. Who are down one parent or maybe in a foster home or have been adopted or whatever. So he said he had interest in it because they're trying to teach these kids to live a lifestyle that is keeps them out of trouble.
Right.
So we talked about that a little bit, and I said, look, I work on my organization is ideologically conservative and libertarian, and I said that I think one of the failures of even some conservatives who work on this issue, certainly libertarians, I think, understand this, but some conservatives who work on the issue are a little scared of the racially charged discussion about it.
Right.
But it's also to me, it's disingenuous because you have to acknowledge that the war on drugs has had a racially disparate impact. Mm-hmm. That there is an entire generation of young black men who have had any future opportunity or prosperity destroyed simply because they sold, a bag of pot to somebody, or were caught with drugs in their car and they were accused of drug trafficking and convicted for it. Those are, and look, I'm not saying they're all innocent. I'm just saying that,
exactly.
I'm saying that,
there's an issue, definitely, and it's
that's a policing discussion.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a policing discussion. That policing, that we and that's something that's not, we're a long way off from that, and the discussion of the First Step Act and the Second Step Act and even the Third Step Act.
Well, Jason, what do you think the second step's going to be? Has anybody talked about that? What's the follow up to this in the future?
I know. Just give away the farm here.
Well, that's why I have you on. You're in DC insider.
Yeah. Thank you for that, asshole. But no, what I know. The night the First Step Act passed, we were invited out to drinks with some White House staff and other people who worked on the bill. And I was told that the White House already had some ideas, and they wanted to get everybody together at some point to discuss those ideas. And certainly, we are open to a conversation about that. I had lunch with Congressman Amash yesterday, and we talked a little bit about one issue that I care deeply about, that's civil asset forfeiture reform.
Oh, exactly.
And he's been working on a bill for a while. Hasn't introduced it yet, but hopefully will soon. Mm-hmm. That deals with that issue. And there are other pieces like Rand Paul's introduced the FAIR Act, and Tim Walberg he's the House. Rand Paul's got the one in the Senate. Tim Walberg has the one in the House. That would be one idea I would throw in there. There'd be a lot of sort of what we call second chance initiatives that I would like to see in a Second Step Act. There are a lot of ideas that I think, and even fixing some of the things we didn't get done in juvenile justice. They passed the Juvenile Justice Reform Act. Actually, the president signed Juvenile Justice Reform Act and the First Step Act the same time. We were there for both those, and we engaged a little bit on Juvenile Justice Reform Act authorizes a 1970s era law called the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, JJDPA for short. There were some things we didn't get in that bill that we really should come back and try to get, and that's one of those things is the phase out of what we call the valid court order, or it's the phase out of the exemption for the valid court order. Basically, the valid court order, a judge can sentence or detain a juvenile who has committed a status offense, and a status offense is an offense. It's defined as an offense because of the person who commits the offense's age. So if you're under the age of 18 and you're caught running away from home or skipping school or smoking or drinking before the right age, you can be detained. So we wanted to phase out that valid court order to make it harder for judges to put kids in juvie who have committed a status offense. Status offenses, in the most true sense of the word, are not crimes.
Okay.
They're crimes because of the kid's age. That's it. Okay. But they're not actual crimes. It's not like dealing drugs or shooting someone or something like that. Is it like
truancy or something like that?
Truancy, running away from home, smoking underage, drinking underage. Those are status offenses.
I gotcha. Now that goes to the compulsory state schooling as well. So I think there's a definitely underlying problem with that as well. I know we're running out of time here, Jason. You got to go. But what are you working on now? What's your next initiative, and where are you pushing against state power to increase our freedom there in Washington?
I mean, right now we're trying to get, and I probably have another 15 minutes as far as it goes.
Okay. Great.
So there's a lot. I mean, we're under a different scenario right now. We have a Democratic House.
Right.
We have a Republican Senate and a Republican quote unquote president. right now, I think there are several different things. I mean, we haven't done any immediate lobbying on legislation. We've had a couple meetings. I mentioned I had lunch with Congressman Lash yesterday. I met with the Republican Study Committee today. Had some conversations with other people as well. I think people are trying to get past the shutdown right now to figure out really what's next on the agenda. Mm-hmm. The things I'm watching for right now immediately are trade.
With China specifically?
Well, so the president apparently is going to propose a bill that would give him more power over trade. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a cataclysmically horrible idea. So the bill is going to be called the United States Trade Reciprocity Act. Mm-hmm. We're already we actually saw the bill yesterday. It's Sean Duffy from, I think, Michigan. He's going to introduce it. Michigan or Wisconsin. I always get the two confused. He's going to introduce it. We're already opposing it. There's obviously budget and spending, because we expect Democrats to roll out a budget sometime in the next couple months that will once again bust through spending caps, spend more money, and we also have a debt limit discussion to happen. That's going to happen sometime in March, and the budget, unfortunately, is directly connected to the debt limit because Democrats included a rule in their rules for the House that when they pass a budget resolution in the House, it automatically deems the passage of a debt limit increase.
Oh, wow.
Or, excuse me, debt limit suspension. So they suspend the debt limit. There effectively is no debt limit for until September 30th of 2020.
So that's the reason why we have, 20-something trillion in debt right now? Is that?
Oh, really? Yeah, we're almost at 22 trillion now.
I haven't looked in 6 months, so I guess.
Yeah, it's 21.9, but what's a few hundred billion amongst friends, right?
Exactly.
But no, trying to stop spending increases, protecting the tax cuts, promoting free trade, continuing to support the good stuff the administration is doing on the regulatory front, rolling back regulation. Those are all things I've got on my immediate radar. There are going to be other things that come up. We have to mobilize to either pass or kill. More likely than not, kill, because there's going to be a lot of bad ideas coming through this House.
Sure.
But that's what I have on my agenda immediately. It's going to be. I expect it to be a lighter year than the last 2 years. I mean, so I've been at Freedomworks now for 4 years, and 2017 was probably the busiest year of my entire life because the amount of stuff that was going on. It was my first year as the lobbyist at Freedomworks, and I was constantly getting my ass handed to me every day. There were a lot of 18-hour days because of just the amount of work and the amount of a lot of 16-hour days. The amount of stuff I had to respond to. So it was a busy time. But this year I expect to be a little bit slower. There's still going to be a lot of stuff to do. But it's, again, mostly killing stuff, which shouldn't be too hard to do given that the Senate is Republican. Now, that's with air quotes again.
Again, air quotes, definitely. What do you think about when we talk about the deficit and the debt? What do you think about auditing the Fed? And, Ron Paul, I know you were caught up in the Ron Paul revolution, I think, like I was. And audit the Fed or in the Fed was so influential to me.
Yeah.
And it seems like that has fallen to the wayside. Is there still a current in Washington, D.C. about auditing the Fed or even replacing the Fed?
Well, I mean, they're certainly on auditing the Fed, but it's died down a little bit. The Congressman Massey, well, it was originally Ron Paul's bill. It was the Federal Reserve Transparency Act. When he left, Congressman Paul Brown picked up the banner. When Paul Brown left, Congressman Thomas Massey picked up the banner. Massey actually just reintroduced the Audit the Fed bill. It's HR 24. It actually has a bunch of co-sponsors right now too. We're supporting it. We haven't put out our letter yet. We've been waiting on Rand Paul to introduce his version because there are two versions. There's a House version, and a Senate version. They're the same bill, but they're going to introduce it in both chambers. So this past Congress was the first year that I can remember since 2011. We're first Congress since since 2011 where the House didn't pass it, which is kind of frustrating. It got pushed out of committee. It was voted on in committee. It was approved, and it was placed on the calendar for floor consideration, but they never brought it up. So there's still an appetite for it. The bill in the last Congress had, I don't remember specifically how many co-sponsors, but it was well over 100, probably approaching 150. I'm actually going to check out and see real fast how many it had. But it never came up. It had 114. That's how many it had. So, but Massey's reintroduced it. Hopefully, we'll see a lot more Republicans come on and tee it up for consideration if and when Republicans take back the House, hopefully in 2020. So, but it's still very much alive. And look, especially with Trump being so pissed off at the Fed.
Right, he's talked
about
it.
He said he'd sign it.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, he said that on the campaign trail back in 2016 that he would sign the bill if it was passed by Congress. And for the life of me, I don't understand why House leadership didn't move it.
And stuff like that gets killed in committees, and that's pretty opaque, isn't it? How that process works, and the head of the committees can just say no or yes if a bill gets voted on.
Well, yes, that's definitely true. And the committee process. So the audit of the Fed, HR 24, in the last Congress, it was actually approved in committee, and the speaker just never, technically it's the majority leader who calls bills to the floor, but really, when it's the speaker who controls the floor schedule. So Ryan just never put it on the calendar and brought it to the floor. Okay. So, but yes, to answer your question, the committee chairman, unless it's a bill that leadership of the party in power that they're supporting, it does not come up. I mean, it won't. It may get marked up by committee, but it's not going to come to the floor. Okay. But most bills, I mean, the last Congress, in any given Congress, 10,000 pieces of legislation will be introduced. Now, that's crazy. I mean, it's an insane number. People don't really realize how absurd. No, that's when I say 10,000 pieces of legislation, that includes post office renamings and resolution expressing the
Pi Day or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's we're gonna call it from henceforth January 10th will be known as today's Thursday. January 8th will be known as Taco Tuesday.
Yeah,
exactly. The second Tuesday in January will be called Taco Tuesday. It includes that stuff. It includes bills that includes resolutions that govern debate on bills. So we're talking about we're talking about a very large amount of legislation. But most of those bills have ostensibly no shot in hell at ever being considered. So actually, I actually pulled it up here. So in the 115th Congress, there were 18,732 pieces of legislation introduced.
Wow, that's crazy.
No, again, that includes.
A lot of fluff, right?
Housekeeping bills. That includes committee assignments. That includes a bunch of different things. But most of those are actual pieces of legislation that members introduce. You got to think there are 435 actual voting members. There are about 10, I think, delegates or there's the resident commissioner of Puerto Rico. There's the delegate to the Virgin Islands. There's the delegate to the American Samoan Islands. All those people can introduce legislation. They just don't get to vote on it. So those are all things that so there and then there are 100 members of the Senate. So you have 535 people who can actually introduce legislation and vote on it, and then another less than a dozen who can introduce legislation. So you're gonna have a bunch of bills introduced over a 24-month period.
And they're all trying to get a piece of that $3.3 trillion budget, right?
$3.3 trillion. I wish it was that small.
Oh, it's more than that now.
Yeah, so
including what is it?
So you have the budget that was approved by Congress last year. I think it was $4.1 trillion.
Okay.
So we have the budget's divided into four pieces of pie. You have some are bigger than others. You have mandatory spending, which is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, pensions, SNAP, food stamps, a few other things, veterans benefits. Then you have interest on the national debt, which is it's about 10% of the pie. Then you have discretionary spending, which is is what we call defense spending and then non-defense spending. So they're about equally divided, that 30-35% of discretionary spending. Mandatory spending is 65%. So we're talking about a massive amount of spending, or actually mandatory spending is closer to, about 60%. Now, that mandatory spending, that piece of the pie is going to grow and continue to grow and continue to grow. It's going to crowd out other areas of the budget. So we have real fiscal problems because we're going to be running deficits of $1 trillion, if not beginning this year, next year.
That's insanity. That is insane. But that's the system we live on, and we talk about systemic issues. And definitely, I think anytime that you can fight back against somebody stealing either your right to choose to do something or your right to keep your money that you earned, I think is something that's a noble endeavor that you're doing there in the heart of darkness, if you will. So
we Brad, we're keeping it up, and we're trying to fight the good fight here. It's frustrating work. But Freedomworks and the crew here, my team and others, we're having some wins, but look, people like you and your listeners, and we need you guys to keep fighting with us, because the winds of statism are clearly blowing, and we have to keep pushing back.
I totally agree on that, Jason. Yeah, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate what you're doing in Washington, man.
Thank you.
And your information today. And I'd love to have you back on. I don't know if you'd like to do that or not. Maybe something on a regular basis, if that's something that you could do. Because it's hard to get an inside view of what it's like to be a libertarian in Washington. So I appreciate you being on. So thank you very much.
I have a lot more gray hair now than I did 2 years ago.
Well, I don't have any hair, so I'm jealous. I know you can't see me, but
well, look, I'd love to come back on. Just let me know when. I'll find time, even if it's on a weekend or something like that. But I appreciate it, and thanks for having me, and good luck to you, and thanks again to your listeners for listening.
I appreciate it, man, and you have a safe flight, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care, Brad.
Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.